Hello and welcome to the Sunday Guardian show by Joyeeta Basu. Today we have a very special guest on our show, Professor Madhav Nalapat, who is the editorial director of the Sunday Guardian, as well as Manipal, I think, Peace Chair in Manipal University. Now, Professor Nalapat, being a geopolitical and strategic expert, we are going to talk about the just concluded G-20 summit. Professor, welcome to the show. Thank you. And the thing is, this is the first question, obvious question is that, what would you say is the biggest takeaway from the G-20 summit?
I would say the biggest takeaway, one, is the diminishing footprint of Xi Jinping's China. Xi Jinping thought that if he were not there, it's like you have a movie without the star of the movie.
Yes.
Let's say that you got a starter. I mean, I know I'm not very familiar with some of the current stars' names, but let's say that you have a blockbuster film because you got a great blockbuster star, and the star's absents himself from the movie and from the sets. He obviously believes that it's going to be a flop. Unfortunately, the tragedy about poor Xi Jinping, he realized that not only was it not a flop, but his absence was not even noticed.
Exactly.
Nobody cared whether he was there or he was not there or whatever it was. Of course, the taxpayer in India saved some money. Otherwise, they would have to spend a certain amount of money on hosting him. But otherwise, his absence meant nothing at all to the G20. So the first point is the world has moved beyond Xi Jinping. I don't know if China is moving beyond Xi Jinping, but the world has. And the second point is the Western world seems to have got it. And I'd like to compliment Joe Biden on this. I think Joe Biden played a very important role in this. Frankly, Rishi Sunak did not, Scholz did not, Macron did not. Meloni, to some extent, did, but she's been very diplomatic with her other EU colleagues. Meloni, after she became Prime Minister, Primo Ministro, seems to have become very, very diplomatic. The fact is that Biden understood that the global South was turning against the West.
Yes.
Of course, he's not prepared to publicly admit that the reason is that the West believes Ukraine to be by far the only important subject to be discussed in any global forum. Let's say you've got a global tourism forum. I'm very certain that the delegates from the European Union, the UK, the US will insist that Zelensky should come and give a lecture, about what's happening in Ukraine. I mean, he became, he was inseparable from the Western world. Wherever Biden and Scholz and Macron and Sunak and others went, well, there was Zelensky in Technicolor. The Indian side was very, very clear. Sorry, we have got a very serious agenda centered a lot around the Indo-Pacific, centered a lot, frankly, on the global South. And we're not going to allow any distraction by going back and going back and going back to the same old subject of Ukraine, in which you have Mr. Zelensky. I mean, he must have appeared on at least 70 to 80,000 videos, if you ask me.
Yep.
70 to 80,000 times on television. We can count, but I mean, fantastic number. So there's no point in listening to the 70,000 and first one more Zelensky, performance on a global stage. So that was very helpful. The Western world understood very clearly that so far as India is concerned, it's led by a no-nonsense leader. And this no-nonsense leader is very, very clear. The focus has got to be on the global South, particularly Africa. And the focus has got to be on the world as a whole. And you can't assume that just because the Ukrainians are European and that the world is Ukraine and Ukraine is the world. I mean, I was astonished, Joyeeta. I was watching some of the press commentary by some of the leading press commentators in Europe. I feel sorry for Europe with this kind of, press commentator trying to brief them. Every one of them was saying, but the most important problem facing the world was ignored. Ukraine was ignored. It was not ignored, by the way. It was very clearly said that the war should end. But Mr. Zelensky was not there. The whole thing is a failure. Now, for God's sake, you got starvation in so many parts of the world. You got diseases in so many parts of the world. You got people dying in the, 10, 20, 100 times more than in Ukraine in other parts of the world. And all you're concerned about is Ukraine. You call yourself, example, I'm sorry to name names. There's a French channel. It claims to be, of course, it's state funded, by the way. So Macron is basically, funding it through the French taxpayer. And the correspondent who was spoken to was hysterical. Ukraine is the big problem. And there was no Ukraine. What he meant was there was no demand. That basically what needs to be done is that Russia should immediately leave all those parts of Ukraine that, frankly, it has occupied since 2014. It's an absurd demand. It's absurd to everybody except to these talking heads, these geniuses who are supposed to be educating the European public. So I feel really sorry for the European public, frankly.
So, would you say that India being able to literally pull off joint, declaration, the New Delhi Declaration, would you say it has been a huge success for India? And would you say how does it establish India as a geopolitical force on the world stage? The statement first, the New Delhi Declaration, and India as a geopolitical force. Would you say India's time has come?
Look, I'd like to say that it's very clear when on the first day of the summit itself, the declaration, the Delhi Declaration was unanimously adopted. Every side compromised on it, quite frankly. The Western world compromised, the Russians compromised, everybody, the global South compromised to some extent, everybody compromised. But the reality is that, what the Prime Minister was talking about, one earth, one family, one future, was seen in practice in the declaration. So I'd like to say that the declaration, even if it had not been adopted, thanks to, pressure from China, I would not have been disappointed because overall, over the last 9 or 10 months, tremendous progress has been made by India in raising concerns of the global South and in finding out solutions to them. Tremendous. The amount of work that's gone in, the amount of thinking and planning that's gone in is, I think, unprecedented in the history of the G-20. Having said that, I'd like to say that this declaration, it's very important because it makes 2 or 3 things very clear. The first point is, it came as a very bad shock to Mr. Xi Jinping in Beijing. Quite possibly, the poor man would not have been able to, take his chicken noodle soup with the same delight that he normally takes chicken noodle soup, because he would have been quite upset at seeing the Delhi Declaration adopted. Well, the reality is, it was very clear diplomacy by Prime Minister Modi. Prime Minister Modi is very friendly with President Putin. He is very friendly with Joe Biden. I'm not sure there's anyone in the world who would say that Joe Biden and President Putin are friends of each other. No one is going to say that. But you have the Indian Prime Minister who is equally friendly with both. And I think you have the Indian Prime Minister who's very friendly with the Israelis. You have Benjamin Netanyahu. He's a pretty, if I may say so, he's a pretty, assertive kind of Prime Minister of Israel. And you have, You have, the Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed of UAE, a very great statesperson. You have a great reformer, Mohammed bin Salman of Saudi Arabia. And guess who is equally friendly with both sides? And frankly, the other countries are following the example of India under Modi. They're also becoming friendly with each other. And that is a very, very great plus. The, the good relationships that Prime Minister Modi has been able to build across the global spectrum is the reason why this is a success. And there have been individuals who have been saying, oh my God, he's spending so much time, out of the country. Well, for heaven's sake, we are a global power. We depend on the rest of the world. The rest of the world depends upon us. We can't make ourselves into a fortress India, lock ourselves in the way one Chinese emperor did, and he destroyed all the ships in the Chinese Navy, and China began a period of decline. And that is exactly what these ladies and gentlemen are saying, who saying, oh, he's traveling too much. Of course he's traveling a lot because India is a world power. It's a global power. And you've seen the impact of that travel. You've seen the impact of those good relations in the G20. Because here, in my view, Biden was instrumental in getting some of the recalcitrant Europeans into line. And I do believe Putin played a very strong part in telling Xi Jinping, my dear Xi, please don't rain on this parade. Indians are good friends of ours. You may not like them, but they're good friends of ours. Prime Minister Modi is a good friend of mine. I don't want to damage my relationship with him and the Russian relationship with India by listening to your, lamenting plea that please, please don't make it unanimous. But I'm very sure she, till the very end, wanted to make sure that there was no unanimity. Finally, he himself had to come around. I think if Joyeeta, if this is not a diplomatic victory, I don't know what is.
Yes, here I have a question. Now, we have seen the Prime Minister has tried to make, he has been saying in all the interviews that he has been giving, that it is time to look beyond GDP-centric development to human-centric development. And that is what G20 is about, where we are moving towards human-centric development, where the problems of the global south are brought to the G20 table. They are discussed. One of the reasons why even African Union was brought in to the group. Now, the question is that now there are certain critics who are talking about, you see, India's influence. India is putting too much of it into this particular summit or the whole presidency, that given the fact that it is going to Brazil, okay, after that it is going back again to the United States and all, this focus on the global south, inside 2 years or so, it is bound to shift. So whatever is being talked about here, long-lasting effect that may not have. Do you agree with that view? If not, why?
Look, I'd like to say quite frankly that this view is not correct, that this is not going to be long-lasting. For one thing, the G20 is no longer just a talking shop. It's become an important global multilateral forum, a very important forum, and that began in November last year with the Indian presidency. It's going to continue into the Brazilian presidency. Mm-hmm. President Lula has, he's an admirer of India. India is an admirer of Brazil. And frankly, President Lula and Prime Minister Modi, I'm certain, will establish a very good relationship with each other. And I'm sure there'll be a lot of mutual visits, between the two countries. The fact of the matter is that I want to ask a simple question for those who are asking the question that you asked me. Is economics meant to serve society, or is society meant to serve economics? Absolutely. For a long time, society has been serving economics. So you see people getting poorer, you see the middle class getting more squeezed, you see higher income people rise into stratospheric levels, and you get a very disjointed kind of human activity, which is not sustainable at all. It's not just a question of climate that has to be sustainable. It's got to be human interaction that has got to be sustainable. And Prime Minister Modi is very clear. The purpose of economics is the benefit of society. It's not society is there to benefit economics, especially for a few. And that is a point India has made. And that is a point which I believe is going to be very difficult to walk back. In the 1980s, you had this revolution of Deng, of Thatcher, of Reagan, in which they said, well, it's money and it's making of money. And if you can't make money, there's something wrong with you. Everybody should try and make as much money as possible, any which way. Frankly, that has led to a world in which inequalities have become very sharp indeed. It's an unsustainable world, and it's leading to social tensions of an unbearable kind. They're not being helped by the fact that a particular country has been using the internet, especially in India and the US, to try and widen social divisions and try and basically, empower the fringe. The reality is that money is important for society. Economics is important for society. And that is where Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam comes in. That's where the Prime Minister's vision comes in. And I do believe that from the 1980s today, in 2023, you are going to see a new kind of paradigm shift. There was a paradigm shift, money is everything. Now the paradigm shift will be people are everything. And this paradigm shift began from the year of 2023 when Narendra Modi became president of the G-20.
Okay, now we can talk a little bit about IMEC, India, Middle East, Europe corridor. Now, how significant is it? And would you say it can pose a challenge to Xi Jinping's BRI? And because there is also some criticism coming from anti-India forces and pro-China forces that are saying that IMEC will become a white elephant. So what do you have to say about that?
Well, I'd like to point out that there is a white elephant there, and that white elephant is practically all of the BRI projects.
Yes.
The purpose of the BRI projects is not the BRI project, Joyeeta. The purpose is twofold. One is to ensure that clusters of hardened Communist Party members settle across the length and breadth of Africa, of Asia, of Europe, wherever you have a BRI project. That's why Georgia Meloni very correctly is moving away from the BRI. Heaven knows on what basis the BRI was sanctioned before she came. There must have been very weighty reasons, let me say, for the BRI to be sanctioned. Very weighty reasons indeed. But the fact of the matter is that these are the white elephants, for God's sake. What's happening to this great China-Pakistan economic corridor? It's a China-Pakistan economic disaster corridor. It's a complete disaster. Whereas this cuts through from India, the fastest growing major economy in the world, to the Middle East, the reforming Middle East, under Mohammed bin Salman, Sheikh Zayed, reformist leaders like that. Then it goes on to Europe. And if I may say so, a Europe that now understands that, as Minister Jaishankar said, the world's problems, are not Europe's problems, and Europe's problems you think are the world's problems. You're wrong. Let me tell you, finally, 2 years later, what Minister Jaishankar said has sunk home, as you can see from the way they have signed on board this particular declaration. Naturally, those who believe that only Europeans count in the world, there are many people in the media and politics in the Western world and in other parts of the world. We have some politicians in India who repeatedly go to the Western world and say, oh my God, what a terrible country. What a ghastly country. We are in really bad shape. And nobody likes India. Everybody hates India. Well, actually, if everybody hates India, I'd like to say that the G20 leaders were the best actors in the world. I think, if Hollywood and Bollywood and Tollywood and whatever need to be worried, because then they acted beautifully. Because the fact is, they showed their love and respect for India, And very importantly, look at Biden and Modi. They were inseparable. I mean, in almost every second image that I saw on television, I saw two people walking arm in arm. And then when you don't have to look closer, it's Biden and Modi. And what happened? I believe for this declaration, a lot of people say, yes, a lot of hard work went into it, 800, 900 hours, 10,000 hours, 100,000 people. Yes. But if there was no understanding at the top, Joyeeta, none of this would have worked. Let's be frank.
Okay,
The understanding at the top was very strong between Biden and Modi and between Modi and Putin. And that is where the success was basically guaranteed.
Okay, I think we have got about 3 minutes left. So one question basically, it's about, we saw the revival of IBSA, India, Brazil, South Africa, which was kind of had got sidelined and forgotten about because of Xi Jinping's push for BRICS. That was one way. Now it has been revived. Does it also mean not just IBSA? Would you say this G20 also proved the end of, or rather beginning of the end of Xi Jinping's influence on the world?
Look, I wouldn't like to make predictions about China, although you will recall that I was for some time the only individual to say that the fall of poor old Qinggang, he has disappeared from God knows where. It was not because Xi Jinping was strong, but the clear indication he's become weak because the chap who's there now is very much a party man. But I'm not going to make predictions. The Chinese Communist Party is a very unpredictable setup, especially the higher rungs of leadership. One thing is clear, that people are asserting themselves against Xi Jinping. Another thing is clear, Xi Jinping is very keen on asserting full control. So where this is going to play out, I don't know. What geopolitical tremors are going to be felt, I don't know. But I'd like to say one thing very, very clearly, that the agenda of the G20 went by much more smoothly as a consequence of Xi Jinping staying away. And therefore, I believe we should all give a big thank you to Xi Jinping. Thank you, Xi Jinping, for staying away. And please stay away even from your office in Beijing, because the more you stay away, the more you look after, your family, and the more you look after things like your garden, and the more you look after things like sports, the better will be the life of the people of China. I think, frankly, the greatest favor that was done by Xi Jinping to India was staying away from the G20. And from the bottom of my heart, I thank CCP General Secretary Xi Jinping for that gesture.
Okay, thank you. Basically, Xi Jinping is the single biggest disrupting influence in geopolitics, or single biggest disruptor in geopolitics in the world today. So the more he stays away from exercising his influence, it's good. At the same time, it seems he has overplayed his hand. He overrated himself quite too much, and India managed the summit perfectly without him. Thank you, Professor, for coming for this show. Until the next time, and thank you, viewers, for watching it.